will the chasm remain a chasm? Can a bridge be built on top of it? The Gospel reading this morning presents an orchestrated drama that calls for a radical analysis of money and social justice. The story, as we heard, explores the relationship between a rich person and a poor one. The rich person is exceedingly wealthy, whereas the other is in desperate straits. The first one has no name. He is referred to with the adjective rich. The story identifies him in terms of his clothing, house, and lifestyle. Scholar Irving Buck says that in the Mediterranean society of the day, fine linen was well known as an import from Egypt, and purple garments identified the wearer as a member of the elite. Clothing made of these two fabrics distinguished the wearer as a person of spectacular riches, a person of prominence. The entrance of the mansion of the rich person is no ordinary door, says Irving. Theta is the word in Greek used for ordinary door, but the door of the man's mansion is pylon, which means a large gate commonly associated with temples and palaces. The person who owns all these things is clearly well off. He feasts. The Greek word implies exuberant eating and drinking at banquets, and he does so not just as an occasional celebration, but day after day, and he does it sumptuously. The other person in the parable, the poor one, has no material possessions, but he has a name. Lazarus is the Greek form of Eliezer, a proper name in Hebrew that may be translated, God is my helper. Unlike the wealthy man, Lazarus is unable to fend for himself. And in this story, he never even says a word. The rich man has everything that Lazarus does not. He enjoys luxury, while Lazarus is destitute. He lives in a magnificent mansion, while Lazarus languishes in the gutter. He feasts lavishly, while Lazarus is so hungry, he would feel fortunate to be allowed to consume some of the scraps that others carelessly toss to the dogs under the table. The rich man wears expensive clothing, while Lazarus is covered with sores. The two live worlds apart, although they are neighbors in one and the same community. Eventually, both Lazarus and the rich man die, and they experience the opposite of what they had been accustomed to. Lazarus, who was formerly outside on the street, now gets comforted on the lap of Abraham, while the rich man, who used to celebrate regularly in his palatial mansion, now is tormented in a faraway fiery place. Everything seems to have been turned upside down and inside out. The rich one, who used to enjoy sumptuous meals, now longs for a drop of water, while Lazarus, who once would have been grateful for mere scraps, now shares the banquet with Abraham and Sarah. Lazarus, who was consistently ignored by the rich man, now receives preferred treatment, while the rich man who regularly ignored him now desires that somebody, anybody, maybe Lazarus, would come to help him. Up to the very end of the story, the rich man remains nameless, a nobody. When he is in Hades, repeatedly he appeals to Abraham as my father. And surprisingly, Abraham in turn acknowledges him as one of his offspring, addressing him with an endearment, a term which conveys the warmth of filial relationship within a family context. My dear child. Teknon is the word in Greek. It seems that Abraham feels a great deal of empathy for the rich man. But the story ends on a tragic note. The gulf is unbridgeable, and there is no possibility of going back and trying to undo the mistakes of the past. The story speaks of extremes. It denounces the enormous gap between those who have too much and those who have nothing. It is an appeal that we transform both individual and social values in order to create strong structures that prevent such a disparity. Neither communism nor capitalism answered adequately the question of the distribution of wealth. And the increasingly competitive market continues allowing the exploitation of natural resources in Africa, for instance. Rogate calls it the new repartitioning of Africa. And it continues allowing a speculation on finance, oil, commodity, and food prices by a greedy business community. The gap between the rich and the poor widens. Nowadays, instead of speaking about the boundary of poverty, economists are speaking about the boundary of greed. Where is the limit for greed? Are you wondering whether the fact that you got a good job and have a decent salary that allows you and your family to live a comfortable life places you among the greedy? Are you wondering whether the fact that you have a house, perhaps two, makes of you an unjust person? I don't believe so. But I do believe that we need to discipline ourselves so we don't acquire more than what we need. Obviously, what we need can be quite controversial. I remember once an actress from Hollywood She needed a $12 million pair of shoes made with diamonds to attend a feast. I imagine that none of us would even consider wearing a $12 million pair of shoes, because most of us really don't get even close to that number. Most of us don't own big fortunes. But still, the story applies to us also. How many pairs of shoes will I buy before my sister can have one? How many houses will you acquire before your brother can have his? Or how many books will our children read before children the same age will learn how to read? The intention is not that we feel guilty. It is that we work towards viable solutions, or at least that we support those who can search for viable solutions. And we do our part as individuals and as members of a society that belongs to a worldwide community. Will the chasm remain a chasm? Can a bridge be built on top of it? If those who have much find the way to share, and those who have none fight for equitable ways of living, perhaps a bridge can be built, and the chasm can become an ancient memory of a time that doesn't exist anymore. I was speaking with a person who is going through treatment for breast cancer this week for the second time, and she said to me, "Where there is no hope, we invent one." We stand for the hymn.